welcome back to the Remote No Pressure Podcast. It's great to be back, and I know what a lot of you are wondering. Jeff, why are you in the studio alone? If you're watching the YouTube channel, it's just me. If you're listening in your car, your tractor, wherever you're at, drift boat, whatever, it's just me. Why is that? Why is it just me? No, Bill has not gone crazy. But what had happened was we actually filmed, recorded this episode, and then for some reason my vocal didn't come through. Somehow the I don't know what happened. But anyways, I digress. We lost the file, so I'm here in the studio. I'm re-recording it, and it's kind of last minute because today was editing day, and Bill's working, and so it's just kind of crazy. So I'm in here trying to make it, but I'm kind of glad. Things kind of went awry because the original intro. Well, this is John Dietsch's, the second part of John Dietsch's interview, and it's a pretty serious interview. You know, he's a pretty prestigious guest. And me and Bill, we have a lot of fun, and the first recording that we had. Talked about the house band. And if you guys have been listening to the podcast for very long, you know who the house band is and you know their name. And we even came up with they have a new album coming out called Jumping the Shark, but it's not the word shark, it's something else. It's shark, but it's Jumping the Shark. It was really a funny joke, really fun, but completely inappropriate for the guests that we have. See, we like to cut up. We like to have a good time. But see, when you have someone like John Dietsch on the horn, we got him here in the studio. Well, not in the studio, but you have him here on the podcast. You want to be nice. You want to put a good impression. You can't be a goofball all the time. You know what I mean? But sometimes I want to be. Sometimes I want to be in 8th grade, Aaron. You know what I mean? I want to be in 8th grade, and I can't be. But that's just the way it is. So today, on the Remote No Pressure Podcast, it's pretty simple. It's just John Dietsch and the second part of his interview. Now, a couple things you'll notice about me if you log on. If you're on the YouTube channel right now, please click subscribe below. Subscribe. You're going to get our updates and this and that. I got a cool mint shirt on. I'll get into that in a second, but let me just tell you this. You'll notice I've got Chris Barclay's awesome hat on. And I'm going down to Texas here in a couple weeks, and I'm pretty stoked about it. I'm really stoked about it, actually. Going to get to see some of my friends down there, including Chris Barclay, Brandon Bales. I'm going to see Aaron Reed, Dr. Brad Boone, Jake Carnes, a few other people. We're going to have a get-together. I'm pretty stoked about it. Pretty excited about it. Should be a lot of fun. But the other thing I was going to talk about has to do with in other news. What I wanted to talk about was Orvis, the company Orvis. Orvis appoints Simon Perkins as president. Orvis, the family-owned outdoor retailer, announces the appointment of Simon Perkins to president effective immediately. Perkins will assume full strategic and operational leadership of the company as president and is the third generation of the Perkins family to lead Orvis since 1965. Outgoing president, CEO Bill McLaughlin, who has worked closely with Perkins on the Orvis executive team, will act as an advisor through the transition period. And this dude is a millennial. I'm pretty stoked about this. I'm looking at this on Midcurrent. They reported it. Spencer Durant reported it there on Midcurrent. And, the thing about Orvis, I don't want to like them because they're not technically like our local fly shop. Do you know what I mean? But the guys that, I'm sure not all Orvis stores are created equal, but I know the Orvis store in Grand Rapids is like, I have a ball every time I go in there, and I'm like, this is not, this is more of a corporate. But I know there's a lot of stores and stuff or whatever, and it's family owned. It's not publicly traded or anything. But I love going into our Orvis shop locally. I love talking with the guys down there. I like talking to Trent. I like talking to all the guys down there, and they're knowledgeable. They're very cool people, super laid back, and I really hope that this whole thing continues going forward, and that it goes great for them with this whole transition. Because I like my local Orvis shop there in Grand Rapids. Everyone down there, they're awesome people. So That's some interesting news. I did go to another big box store that happens to be, I think it is publicly traded. I'm not sure, but I went to the store this weekend. I had some shopping to do for my Texas trip coming up, and Orvis and the local fly shops are pretty far away, so I had to go to this big box store, and it was probably the most miserable shopping experience I ever had. They didn't have anything that was cool from my age. Everybody was clothing for like 60 and over, which is cool. I'm sorry but most of the people who are 60 and listening to this podcast, if you're over 60 and listening to a podcast, you wouldn't like the clothing there either. You see, I used to talk, oh, well, you're over 60, well, now that I'm 40, 60's not that far away. Doesn't mean just because you turn 60, you're going to be some old grandpa or something. So if you're over 60 and you're listening to the podcast, well, you probably wouldn't be able to buy clothing at this particular place either, because it was just all old, big cargo shorts and that kind of thing. So I ended up buying a shirt because I had gift cards, and you got to spend the gift cards there. Of course, they didn't have any shirts that I like, so I found one, which I'm wearing here, actually on the podcast. This nice and cool shirt here. But they had one shirt that I somewhat liked, which is this one. I kind of settled for it. And then they had other shirts that were, there was one heathered fishing shirt that I had to order because they had one that was pretty cool, but they had to ship it to my house because they didn't have it in stock. And I swear to God, they're just all they are is a big credit card company, and they make if you look at their balance sheet, I guarantee most of their revenue comes from interest paid on that stupid credit card. They offer you $20, a $20 coupon when you come in if you sign up for their credit card, or maybe give you a free hat. You guys know what big box store I'm talking about. And I want to like it because it's the closest one. All the people that work there were grumpy. I'm just man, I wish I could go to my local Orvis shop. And this is not a commercial for Orvis. I'm being genuine when I'm talking about my local Orvis shop. I really like the guys down there. They're really cool. We've had some live events down there. It's almost like your local fly shop. So it's really cool that they got someone fresh at the helm. That's exciting. Who knows? Maybe after this podcast, you guys will have someone fresh at the helm of this podcast after this episode, because hopefully no one kills me from the big box store. But they know who they are, and I don't think they care. I don't think they care. And you like how I said that? They care. Almost like the Bears. They care. You know what I'm talking about? The old SNL. God, I need Bill. I need Bill here is what I need, but I don't have Bill. So anyways, so we have a great episode lined up for you. This is John Dietsch's second part. If you haven't listened to the first part, I highly encourage you to go back. He talks about the making of A River Runs Through It. This second part, he talks about the movie quite a bit too, but he's also talking about his book, which we have links below. And be sure to check us out. Also, before we get started, our buffs are on sale right now for $5, our Sasquatch buffs. Go and buy a few to help support the podcast and help you protect from COVID and also from Sasquatch. As always, there's $100 reward. If you are attacked by a Sasquatch and live through it and get proof, I will pay you $100 cash. And also, this will protect you from Sasquatch and also from COVID-19. So anyway, every time I hear COVID-19, I think of that faith healer that they made that video, COVID-19. This show's already getting off the rails, and we have a good guest. I'm trying to stay positive. I'm trying to be on good behavior because I have to be. I can't go off the rails, okay? But I'm very appreciative of John Dietsch. I'm glad he came on the show with us. Turns out he's a really fantastic guy, an awesome author, and he understands the spirituality of fly fishing, which is the whole reason I started this whole thing. Was the art, the spirituality behind fly fishing. And John gets it. When you talk to John or you hear him talk, he understands that. It's his religion. So anyways, really happy to have John on the podcast. Welcome to the podcast, everyone. Let's light the fire.
I don't think it was an accident that I ended up in the role in the film that I ended up with. And I have a connection in a soul way to Norman, even though I never knew him. And it's, and maybe it's not even to Norman, it's to what Norman talks about the words under the water, and some of them are theirs. This idea that there is a power in rivers and in the ocean and that under the rocks are the words of our ancestors. And boy, am I connecting with that these days. And that's the challenge, is that I couldn't get out, in this time of loss, this time of change, of transformation, to sort of be around. In some ways, it's like my church. I feel like it's my temple. But I happen to be Catholic, and I'm a practicing Catholic, actually. But I don't think that there's a dichotomy between, a religious faith and the spiritual connection that we have to waters. And I think that's what River and Through It also was about. In that first line, in my family, there's no difference between religion and fly fishing. And I feel that way. I just feel that it's, I think that we are, as a group, we're zealots. We're, some of us are more, we have different factions. And there's a story in my book called the Temple of Spey, and it's where I went up and went spey fishing for the first time with, it turns out, the world champion. He's been world champion, I think, at least one or two times. This Travis Johnson, quite a character. And when he found out on the way down, I think we were like 15 minutes late, and he was just really pissed that we were 15 minutes late. Because, like so many guides, he really wanted to get us into a fish. And steelhead fishing, which I do a lot more of now with a spey rod, is typically an early morning or a late evening kind of a thing. And anyway, when he heard that I wanted to nymph fish, or that I nymphed fish for steelhead, I mean, it was like he wanted to. I can't tell you what he said, actually, unless can you bleep it out?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. All right. So he turns to me. First, he said, John, you should really turn off the camera. We were doing my show. I have a show called Adventure Guides for Outdoor Channel, and for I did for 5 seasons, and NBC Sports, and that I hosted and executive produced. And so we had the cameras in the back, and he turns the camera and goes, "You should really turn that off." I go, No, go ahead and just say it. He goes, "I would rather fucking jerk off with 50 grit sandpaper than watch a fucking bobber go down the river."
That's hilarious.
Yeah. So anyhow, but it's funny. This is not quite the segue I was hoping for here, but talk about the spirituality of fishing. But it's funny because I have begrudgingly become a spey caster, and and swing. Even with a single-handed rod, have learned to swing the fly. The last fish I caught was actually on a single-headed rod, swinging the fly for a steelhead up in Washington. And what I found with spey casting is that what I love so much about it is, you don't have to watch. You don't have to just. It's a feel, and the irony is that you don't pull. You actually let the fish take your fly. For those of us who've done it, and then we know, you know what I'm talking about. There's, I'm so used to setting the hook and to watching the fly in the water, or watching the bobber, or whatever. Okay, it's not bobber. Watching the indicator, or watching my line. Because I'm starting to do a lot more, check nipping style. And the reality is that when we're fishing, we're just, but it's more so with the spey casting. It's just being in the process. It's just, I can look around when I'm spey casting. I can, I take a step down. There's a meditative quality to it. I think of all the disciplines, that's the one that to me has the most meditative quality. And so I love to steelhead fish. And I've gone, I think I went, it might have been 7-8 days without a steelhead a couple of years ago. And that also, that austerity, there's something to that of reminding myself that, I'm here to be on the water. I'm here to be in the process. Mm-hmm. Because if I get too into that competitive, how many fish you get, fish counting or how big, and look, I will admit, I love to catch big fish too. So let's just be clear about that, right? But I think that there's a balance, and I try to sit down and I guide in Aspen, as I mentioned, it's a company that I've been guiding for 30 years, 35 years actually. So Aspen Outfitting. And I often will take my clients out and we'll sit down before we fish and just get quiet, and just stop. And that silence to me, and that sound that I heard in the ocean. Of course, for me, there's just nothing quite like the river. Mm-hmm. It is something that just, that silence and that sound of the river is just, it's like manna from heaven. It's just, there's something so soulful. It fills me up. And what's been really getting me through the pandemic is I'm about 3 blocks from the ocean, and it's going down and sitting and just listening to the ocean and meditating and filling up with that sound. So I think a lot of what we do is sound based and just being on the water. I love that phrase. No man steps into a river twice because the river has changed and so has he. Right. It's just a reminder, especially now, that nothing ever stays the same. And fishing has that effect on me for whatever reason, and I think for a lot of us.
Yeah, I think you're in good company for sure with a lot of people. I think about one of the interviews I did very early on. I mean, when I started this podcast, John, I didn't know anyone. So I'd literally sit down on LinkedIn and email 10 people a night until someone said yes to an interview, right? And one of the people that agreed to me was Dave McCoy. And I don't know if you know who Dave McCoy is out of Seattle.
I do.
Yeah.
I do. Is the same Dave McCoy that his father started Mammoth? Is that the same McCoy?
No, he owns Emerald I think it's called Emerald Outfitters out in Seattle. Mm-hmm. I don't know about his father. I'd never asked him, but he I think it's like episode 5 or something. And here I am, like I've experienced everything that you've talked to me about today. The spiritual side of things, this healing. And I didn't know. I didn't know anyone in the business. I didn't know anyone who fly fish when I first started. And I was just thinking, surely some other people have the same story as I do. You know what I mean? Because this has been so impactful to me. And so I talked to Dave McCoy, and he goes on about how he was guiding. And he tells a phenomenal story about how he had a client who was he's like, hey, why don't you cast your rod over there? And he was a young guide, and he was like, cast, real quick up against the wall, and he's telling the story about how he was so into like what you're saying. And the client just sat down in the boat and was just like, can we just sit here for a minute, And can we just take it in? And it was an older guy, and Dave was a really young guide. And he tells a story of how that changed his life, like taking it all in, being present. And I think that now it's with COVID and all this, we've had to be kind of forced to deal with our demons, right? And we've had to be quiet. There's a lot of these things that we're having to do because of the COVID-19 thing, but before this, especially when life is so busy, sometimes when you're on the river, it might be the only time that you're quiet, the only time that you're away from everything. And it is that water, it is that sound that is healing. I with the symbolism of religion, it's baptism. You go in as one person and you come out a new man. That's how I feel when I go fly fishing. And I romanticize it. I know it probably romanticize it too much, but it's been so impactful to me that it's really changed my life, Quick question for you. You had mentioned if you're not on water for a while, or in the outdoors, this deficit disorder, right? This nature deficit disorder. Mm-hmm. My buddy calls it an adventure deficit disorder. He's got a podcast called that, ADD,
Oh, wow. Yeah.
But you have this nature deficit disorder or whatever. And you're also a creative person. I'm a creative person. I'm a songwriter. We've had tons of amazing artists and musicians. We've had authors on our podcast, and it's always the same story. It's consistent. And the more artists I talk to, the more writers, the more creatives I talk to, it is just the same consistent thing. And like you said, you have to be outdoors. It kind of helps you cope with that. When did you discover fly fishing? Was that something you did as a child? I mean, because the reason, when did you discover fly fishing?
Well, I actually, living here in I grew up here in Southern California, And my dad was, God bless him. He's now 80, 87 years old, and not he's he's starting to really struggle with dementia, and just starting. I love him so much. In fact, it's funny. I'm going to have to say that I caught a fish this morning. It's the first fish I've caught because of, here on the beach, because as I said, it was closed. But I caught a yellowfin croaker this morning on my dad's old rod, and that fish hasn't had a fish caught on it for probably 40 something years. And I recognized that. That was one of the reasons why I stopped, and I went up and I decided to meditate. I wanted to just really savor the moment, knowing that rod, the last time it had caught a fish was when my dad used it. And it's possible I could get my dad out again. I really hope I can before he passes. But it's possible that won't happen. And I don't know. But it was just, that's something about the sport. But my dad took me up to the Sierras when I was very young. We have pictures of my sister and my two brothers holding up fish, from the Sierras. We used, salmon eggs, and they're probably, put in take, stockers. But I still remember. I can smell the smell of the peat moss and and hear the river, and I can see that fish taking the salmon egg, and hooking my first fish. I still, it's just indelibly etched into my mind. I don't know why. Well, I do know why, because I believe in spirit, and I believe that I was, brought to this sport and much of the way that you talk about how it's helped you, to be connected to all things. It's to me, and in the book I say, the beginning of the book, I say, that everything can be boiled down to, the fly fishing to me, it boils down life. I said, the more I fly fish, the more I discover its rich ability to boil down life's most complex problems into the simplest of truths. Like life, the river is constantly changing. And then I use the Heraclitus quote, stepping into the river is indeed a unique moment each time, filled with anticipation and promise. Nothing stays the same. Norman Maclean, author of the novella A River Runs Through It, wrote, "Under the rocks are the words, and some of them are theirs. These are the voices of our ancestors, and if we learn to listen, they can transform our hearts." And that really goes back to, my dad teaching me, we moved back east, and he took me up to the Orvis fly fishing school, and that's where I learned to fly fish. In the beginning, as a beginner, I think the spiritual part of the sport, it can be challenging. It's like with anything, when you're learning something new, it can be frustrating. And the river teaches us patience, and so does the sport, especially as beginners. I love to take beginners out, by the way. I think it's one of my favorite things to do, because
Yeah.
getting someone their first fish, especially if it's like a dad and his 14-year-old son or something, there's just nothing like it. There's just nothing like, they're going to have that picture up somewhere for, the next 50 years. And it's just an honor to be a part of that circle. And so I got into it. I ended up going to the University of Colorado, and when I was at the University of Colorado, there was a creek there, and I started fishing it, playing a little hooky, often, maybe too often.
Similar stories, yeah,
yeah, right.
To a lot of people.
Yeah, right. And on Boulder Creek, and then just found places nearby, and then found other places, and one thing led to another, and I ended up moving up to Aspen and ski instructing, and I met Andy Mill, and Andy Mill was really my mentor. He, some of you might know who he is, because he's won the Gold Cup. He's probably the best tarpon fisherman in the world, and he's won the Tarpon Cup 5 times. But Andy sort of took me under his wing. he showed me how to not only how to nymph fish. He introduced me to the local guide named George Odier from a shop called Fothergill's, and that's how I got my first guiding job, was through Andy. And also, Andy gave me my first job in television as a PA and then as a writer on his show, Ski with Andy Mill, because I was a ski racer and skied at the University of Colorado, the B team, when I was younger in my days. And so Andy's, I blame Andy for my career.
It sounds like you've had a pretty good career. And you know, when you talk about a River One Stewart as your claim to fame, if you have one of those in your lifetime, that's a great claim to fame, you know. But also you've done so much with the book. What did the process what did the process of writing this book teach you? What did you learn from it?
Well, I'd say the biggest thing I learned from it was humility. I thought that the book would take me a year, and it took me probably more like 8.
Wow.
You know, and some of that time was, I mean, it wasn't like I wasn't constantly writing. So that's the other thing, is that I think it's important as a writer to write, obviously. But sometimes I can find excuses. There'd be months at a time where I would just put the book aside, and I'd get busy with other projects and in particular. But it to me, it's the consistency and doing it not addictively or not in a way that's where I can't be present with my wife or my kids because I'm just, you know, manically writing, which I used to do, you know, and so it's taught me to be more consistent and sort of be more balanced with my life, I think, too. And the humility part of it is just, you know, I'm putting this book out there, and, you know, again, it's like fishing, you know, to say I don't want the book to be big, like I don't want to catch a big fish, I'd probably be lying. You know, I want the book to be successful. I want to be successful when I fish, but, you know, it's really about being in the process. You know, the book is done now. You know, I'm writing some other stuff, and I have to start to get more focused on that. I've had to spend a lot of time, you know, on the promotional part of this, so which I didn't expect. But, you know, there's a lot that goes into. I like doing a show like yours and getting the word out about this kind of thing, which I didn't expect. But I have to put my ego on the shelf. You know, it's in order to write, and also in order to let it have its own life. You know, it's not up to me if the book will be successful, win awards, or, you know, be a bestseller or whatever it is. It's just I wrote the book. Now I'm writing other stuff, and I will write other stuff, and I have to be humble about that. It's and stay in the process.
I think that is every creative's goal, is to be vulnerable and humble. I think about John Prine. I don't know if you're a Prine fan.
Sure, I love his work.
Yeah. And thinking about how much of just a vulnerable human being he was and everything he did. And I was heartbroken when he passed away, but I read an article, I can forward it over to you, but about what made him the writer that he was his vulnerability and his humility. And it's kind of like the older you get, you kind of have a bullshit meter with people, and you know if they're putting up a fake front or if they're being an authentic person, you know. And I think true artists and people who are able to be humble through the process and be vulnerable, that's what makes them great. So that's really cool that you say that.
Well, I really appreciate you bringing up that word vulnerability. You know, there is an old understanding of what it means to be masculine, and I think that it can destroy our planet. I really do, and I think that because a man is vulnerable does not make him weak. In fact, it's the exact opposite. If we can't learn that, we are not going to be here much longer. And I think that that's part of what I've learned from the work I've been doing is seeing how how frightening it can be to be vulnerable. You know, I'll be honest. This birthing this book is you know, I have to just detach from the results, because it's not about me trying to please people.
Right.
It's about me trying to be authentic. And, you know, hopefully there are things in the book that will help. You know, I think part of what reason I wrote the book was to help men to see what it's like to be vulnerable. You know, and to some people, it's going to really trigger them, you know, and it's going to, you know, there's a whole thing going on, not just in this country, but around the world of this, I call it masquerading, you know, you know, to be somebody, to project this fake power. You know, it's like, you know, to look strong by being a hypocrite, you know, and to me, it's really dangerous. It's really very, very dangerous. You know, Brene Brown does a lot of work, you know, with this concept of vulnerability, and it has to do with being willing to fail.
Right.
And I write about that in the book in terms of how you know, the CEO of Google, Schmidt, you know, he rewards people for failing. You know, they actually have awards at, you know, in the division of, it's called Google X, that they're the ones that came up with a car, you know, the self-driving car. And they come up with things that are just so out there that that most of the times they don't work. But that's why he wants everyone to know it's okay to fail. And in fact, it's good to fail, because it's not failure. We've decided somehow that failure is failure, and it's there's no relativity to it. It's just failure. It's not failure. It's learning.
Right.
And we have a whole generation of kids who have been, in essence, sort of taught that, in my opinion, you know, that you can't let anyone see you fail. You look at social media, you know, it's like a goldfish bowl.
Right.
You know, you don't see a lot of people talking about, you know, their how they learned from the things that didn't work. But anything ingenuous comes from that willingness to be vulnerable and to have loss, and to have that loss transform into something beautiful, which hopefully is a result. It's a result. It may not be the result that you started out to try to get, but it's, you know, and Brene Brown is doing this work with all the biggest companies, you know, showing them that vulnerability is actually the key to success. And we know this in fly fishing, you know, from us trying things, you know, if we don't start trying new things, we're not going to grow.
And even the process of fly fishing itself, there's a learning curve. You got to look like an idiot for a little bit, and then you're like, oh, okay, I got this, you know. But there's this learning. It's not just a Zebco 202 with a worm on the end of it. You know, there's a little bit of a process to the whole thing. You know, what is it called when a religious person, they have their the things they always do. I can't, the sacred acts, right? There's the tippet, there's all these little pieces. I mean, there's so many things you could compare it to, but yeah, it's kind of overwhelming when you start to learn to fly fish. You know, you have to be a little bit vulnerable. And I have a good friend of mine, he's a fly fishing guy, and he said all fly anglers tend to be people who like doing things the hard way, you know. And it's so true. You know, there has to be a level of vulnerability to do this. Now, I grew up fishing my whole life, spin fishing, John. I mean, I grew up in Houston, Texas, and I grew up fishing the Gulf. I grew up all that, you know, but I was always spinning gear. And it wasn't until I picked up a fly rod that my life was really changed. Let me ask you this question. Why do you think that is? Why do you talk to tons of, you know, spin gear guys or whatever? Why do you think fly fishing is different?
Well, you know, I went, I think the way I like to answer that question is to tell you a little story about a guy on my show, Adventure Guides. It was the series I was doing for Outdoor Channel. we went to Belize, and I was working with Ex Officio at the time, and a gentleman by the name of Ed Horstman was really good friends with Steve Benzak, who at the time was the president of Ex Officio, and he came down with me to Belize, and it turned out that he was not much of an accomplished fly fisherman, and so he didn't really want to be filmed fly fishing. And my show was about fishing. But I fly fish. That's all I ever really was. I mean, I do some bass fishing, but I'm not. You know, I'm not much of a spin fisherman. I loved the fly fishing too much. But you know, that's how I sort of grew up doing it, and I still do a little spin fishing here and there. And in this case, you know, Ed decided to use bait to catch bonefish, and you know, I think that you know any kind of fishing can be meditative and can be you know just getting out in nature and connecting. So I come out from a different angle and say that you know I like to look at I like to look at how we're similar rather than how we're more elitist. And I don't. I'm not saying that that's what the question you asked me. Sort of the thing about the fly fishing, you know, when humility is brought to it, and you know, I think some people who had been hosts of a show like that may have not allowed Ed to you know to they would have been offended. You know, someone was bait fishing for bonefish, and I think that's something that we have to be really careful, you know, with as fly fishermen, is to not look down upon somebody who's spin fishing. And I know some people that are like that, not many, but there are some people like that. And so acceptance to me is part of what I like to bring to the sport. But there is something there's something artistic, I think, about you know you're mentioning about artistry. There's something about artistry and grace in the cast and in learning it, and it's much more difficult to learn a fly cast than to learn how to you know throw a spinner, you know, a lure or something, you know, and to you know throw something with weight and a worm. Uh, you know, there's definitely some, and I've been out with some of these bass fishing guys are amazing. You know, getting you know casting underneath you know willows or what have you, and it's uh, so it you know it's just getting underneath the trees when they're casting is artistry, but there is something about what we are doing, especially in a river. I think I would answer that question. It's because of the river. You know, you know, I fish in the ocean and I fish in lakes with a fly rod, but there's just something about fly fishing on a river in particular that, and I don't know what it is, and I'll spend my life trying to write about you know its essence, but it has something to do with like what Maclean talked about, that there's words under the rocks. There's something about the pace of what we're doing, the fact that we're not using bait, we're not using metal. We're it's a little bit like saying what's the difference between you know going out and shooting a deer with a rifle or shooting you know a deer with a bow. And you know there's an artistry to it. It means you know having a lot more patience and stalking in a way that you're not going to get when you're using what I call hardware. So I think that's how I would see it. And hopefully for me it's a gateway to this other meditative aspect of it. And I think there's a mindfulness that we can find with fly fishing. We could find it with anything really, but the fact of us of doing catch and release, of being in a moving body of water, using feathers and you know to imitate insects, you know, at its highest sort of form. That there's just something about it and that artistry that lends itself to mindfulness, which is really what I see where the sport can go. I think that's sort of the next, at least for me, that's the next the level of what we do is getting in touch with ourselves. And by the way, I think we've spent so much time in our culture looking outward for success. And I think part of what's happening with this virus is it's reminding us of the need to look inward. And that's where I'm going with the sport is that, and Norman saw it with River Runs Through It. The bookends of that film are so powerful about coming to the end of your life and really looking back and saying what was important, what is important. And for Norman, it was that connection he had with spirit when he found, himself on the water, just him and his higher power, standing in water. And again, going back to that quote, and knowing that, every moment is precious. And, we've been given a gift, I think. And I was given a gift this morning by poking that fish and letting it go, it's just, and then being reminded about, I had my dad's rod, and I got to sit and meditate about how lucky I am to be on this planet. Because there's been some times when it just, that darkness and all that media attention about this thing that's going to kill so many people can just take you down. Right. And, it's never going to be like it was. And, it's just like, whoa, wait a minute. There's a simplicity to fly fishing. There's a simplicity to living, of just the breath, taking a breath and just being, that I think we've gotten away from. And hopefully, my book is certainly a way of it's really, it's an honoring of my life and an honoring of my love.
I'm really looking forward to reading through it even more. Like I said, I got, I have the PDF version, but I haven't quite got the other version yet.
Well, probably copy. Because the problem with that hard copy is it's taking 2 to 3 weeks to ship because of COVID and for me, there's the other thing that, speaking of humility, you asked me about the lessons from writing the book is, I had all of these, Tom, I was going to be doing this thing with Tom Skerritt. It was a book reading up in Seattle, and there was a bunch of other, parties and, gatherings that were, and then when this thing came down, I said to the publisher, so I guess we're going to postpone this. And no, your book needs to get out now. Because it's really about grief. It's about overcoming grief and integrating grief, not just pushing it away, but integrating it into our lives and seeing how that can be a gift and how it can be used to transform ourselves into another way of being. And it's important right now. So they decided to bring it out. And so everything I've been doing is virtual.
Yeah, one of my good friends, Aaron Reed, wrote a book called Fly Fishing Austin in Central Texas, and it's a fantastic book. It's one of the best sellers there on Amazon, and they invited me down to come play at his book release party in Austin. It was actually last week, and we were all pumped up, excited. He had a bunch of kind of the same story you did, and everything has just gotten pushed back and canceled. But your book, Graced by Waters, I'm looking forward to diving into it even more. If someone wanted to purchase that, John, where would they do that?
Well, the best place is just to go up to Amazon. You can just type in Graced by Waters, or my name. It's Diet School without the OOL.
Okay.
So you'll never forget that now. And on Amazon, it's Graced by Waters, GRACED. It's also on the Simon & Schuster site. That's our distributor, Simon & Schuster, and as well as Barnes & Noble. And so all the major outlets. It's not really, it's funny, not a lot of books are shipping right now because of the COVID situation to the bookstore. So it's but you can order it through your local bookstore, which I would encourage, and they can order it for you. Because of Simon & Schuster, it's readily available, and I appreciate the plug.
Yeah, for sure. We'll be sure to put all those links up on the on the show notes there. And thank you so much for spending some time with us. It's a very honor to have you on. And I'm sure we'll be in touch sooner or later. Maybe we'll hit the water. It was just great. It sounds like
I'd love
you
to do that, Jeff. And I just want to say, I think that your podcast and the it's uncanny to me that this podcast is in existence, because you're bringing so much spirit to the sport, and your story of your existential crises, and I've had many, and
sure.
it's some of them are in the book, and I think that fly fishing. I say in the book that if it wasn't for fly fishing, I'd be dead.
Right.
And I mean that. I think that it has that much meaning and that much therapeutic value for me as a human being. And I think I see ourselves as being, we're spiritual beings having a human experience, and the sport of fly fishing has helped me, with that.
Well, thank you so much, John. I greatly appreciate it. Thank you for your insight.
Thank you so much.
Your book, Graced by Waters, available at your local bookstore, Amazon.com, anywhere you'd like to order it. Just click on the show notes below. We'll have plenty of links. And thanks again. And we'll be in touch. Thank you, John.
Thank you so much, Jeff.
Well, thank you guys so much for joining us on the Remote No Pressure podcast. Bill, I always appreciate you hanging out with me.
Yeah, it's always a blast.
You do a great job. You're funny. It's no wonder you found a wife and things are going so well for you. You've got the charisma. You've got what it takes.
Flattery will get you everywhere.
You got what it takes, Bill. You're going to make it in this town, kid.
Now that Corona's opened up, the doors are all opening. Possibilities are endless.
The possibilities are endless for us and for you. Now the question is, do you love your children? Do you love your wife and your family like Bill loves his wife? That's the question. If you love them, you don't want them to get attacked by a Sasquatch.
No.
You can go to our website at remotenopressure.com, and for $5, you too can own your very own your very own Sasquatch repellent buff.
You can't afford not to.
You can't afford not to. Thank you guys so much for joining us this week on the Remote No Pressure podcast. Be sure to check us out at remotenopressure.com. And what else? What else, Bill?
Subscribe to the YouTube. Yep, we did that. The buffs. Yep, got that. That's it.
All right.
Leave your comments below.
Leave your comments below. Subscribe.
Yeah.
Until I think it's over here, over there. Somewhere. Until next time, go fishing.